The first thing I saw when I came home was my mother serving cocktails to strangers in the mansion I bought for her. For 12 years, I had imagined this moment in different ways. I pictured a quiet driveway, maybe the ocean breeze carrying the sound of gulls. I imagined my mother standing at the door, older, yes, but smiling, safe, proud that her son had finally come home. I imagined peace. What I found instead was music, laughter, the sharp clink of glass against glass. I stood just beyond the open gates of the waterfront estate and watched a party unfold in my backyard. My backyard. People lounged by the pool with drinks that cost more than most monthly rents. Designer swimsuits, gold watches, the kind of casual luxury that comes from never worrying about consequences. And moving between them, with a silver tray trembling in her hands, was my mother. She wore a black and white uniform that did not belong to her. Her shoulders were hunched, her steps cautious. Each time someone lifted an empty glass, she hurried forward, apologizing even when no apology was required. She looked small, fragile, erased. For a moment, my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. My name is Andrew Hale. I am 61 years old. For over a decade, I worked in covert operations overseas, in places that never made the news and missions that never officially happened. I survived explosions, ambushes, and crashes that should have killed me. I learned how to disappear, how to wait, how to endure. None of that prepared me for this. This house, the one glowing behind her in the Florida sun, was never meant to look like this. 15 years earlier, after my first major contract payout, I bought it outright, $6.8 million, no loans, no partners, just a promise I made to myself and to the woman who raised me. My mother, Eleanor Hale, raised 2 boys alone after our father died when I was 9. She cleaned offices at night and worked a diner during the day. She never complained. She never missed a school event. She never let us believe we were poor, even when I knew she skipped meals so we could eat. I bought this house so she could rest, so she could wake up to the sound of water instead of alarm clocks, so she could finally live the life she put on hold for everyone else. I had called ahead before returning. I told my younger brother Lucas that I was coming home for good. He sounded surprised, too surprised. He laughed awkwardly and said Mom was doing great, that everything was perfect, that I had nothing to worry about. He lied. I moved closer along the hedge line, instinctively silent. Old habits die hard. As I stepped into view, my mother looked up. Our eyes met. There was no recognition. She smiled politely, the way you smile at someone you are supposed to be nice to, but do not know. She walked toward me and asked if I was part of the maintenance crew. The air conditioning had been acting up, she said. Could I take a look later if I had time? I could not breathe. This was the woman who memorized my childhood scars, the woman who could tell my mood by the way I shut a door. And now she did not know me at all. Behind her, stretched out on a custom teak lounger, was Lucas. He looked relaxed, confident, comfortable in a way that made my stomach twist. He wore expensive sunglasses and held a drink that caught the sunlight. Next to him was his wife, smiling lazily as if this entire scene belonged to them. Lucas did not look at our mother once. I watched as Eleanor nearly dropped the tray. I watched her whisper apologies to a woman young enough to be her granddaughter. I watched a man snap his fingers at her for more ice, She obeyed instantly. Something inside me went cold. I could have walked out then. I could have said her name. I could have ended the charade in seconds. But 12 years in the shadows taught me that the worst traps are the ones you rush into. I needed to understand what had been done to her, and who had done it. I stepped back into the shade, unseen. From where I stood, I could see the house clearly, the walls I had chosen, the pool I had built. The life I had intended, it no longer belonged to us. As the party continued, I realized something else. No one treated my mother like family. They treated her like staff, like furniture, like she had always been there and always would be. That was the moment I understood this was not neglect. It was design. I left the property without a sound, got into my rental car, drove 3 blocks away and parked beneath a row of palms. My hands were steady when I opened my laptop. My heart was not. I did not know yet how deep the betrayal went. I did not know how many lies had been told in my absence. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I did not survive 12 years of war to come home and lose my mother to something worse. And whatever had been done in that house was about to be exposed. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my rental car 3 blocks from the house, engine off, windows cracked, watching the glow of the mansion lights rise above the palm trees. Music faded, guests left, laughter dissolved into silence. But the image of my mother carrying that tray stayed burned behind my eyes. At 2 in the morning, I opened my laptop. For years, this machine had been my lifeline, encrypted, isolated, built for places where curiosity got people killed. Tonight, it was pointed at something far more dangerous than any foreign enemy: family. I started with public records, property databases, county filings, things anyone could access if they knew where to look. The house appeared immediately. Same address, same lot description, same square footage, different owner. According to the county clerk, the property had been transferred 6 years ago from Eleanor Hale to Lucas Hale. No sale price listed, no mortgage, a clean transfer. Gifted. My jaw tightened. My mother would never give this house away. She still asked permission before changing a picture frame. I zoomed in on the scanned deed. Her signature was there, at least something that tried to be. I knew her handwriting, the way she looped her letters, the way she leaned slightly left when she signed her name. This signature leaned right. The spacing was wrong. The E in Eleanor was sharp, not rounded. It was a forgery. I dug deeper. 3 years after the deed transfer, another document appeared. Guardianship papers, filed in family court. Petitioner, Lucas Hale. Subject, Eleanor Hale. Reason cited, diminished mental capacity. Early cognitive decline. Inability to manage personal and financial affairs. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. My mother read 2 newspapers every morning. She remembered birthdays, anniversaries, old phone numbers. She corrected my grammar when I spoke too fast. There was nothing wrong with her mind, but the court records did not care about truth. They cared about paperwork. Attached to the filing was a medical evaluation, a single appointment, 1 doctor, a short report full of vague language and convenient conclusions. The assessment stated that Eleanor Hale appeared confused and relied heavily on her son for answers. Of course she did. He had probably sat beside her, interrupted her, spoken for her. He had probably told her what to say before they walked in. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly. Training kicked in. Anger clouded judgment. I needed facts. I pulled bank statements next. For 12 years, without fail, I had sent money home every month. Enough to cover taxes, maintenance, staff if needed. $20,000 wired from accounts that could not be traced back to me easily. Those deposits stopped appearing in my mother's account 6 years ago. Instead, they were redirected. Same amounts, same dates, different destination? Lucas, over $200,000 a year for 6 years. I ran the numbers twice. Nearly $1.5 million siphoned quietly while my mother served drinks in a uniform. My hands curled into fists. I forced them open. Then I found the file that made the room tilt. Life insurance. Before my first deep cover deployment, I had taken out a policy. $10 million. Standard procedure for men like me. If you disappear for good, you make sure your family does not. The beneficiary was clear. Eleanor Hale, sole recipient. The policy status read closed. Claim paid. 8 years ago. I scrolled down slowly. Cause of death listed as killed in action. Location undisclosed. Remains unrecovered. Beneficiary payout $10 million. Recipient Lucas Hale, acting as legal guardian and executor of Eleanor Hale's estate. They had declared me dead. Not missing, not presumed. Dead. I sat back in the seat, the world narrowing to a thin tunnel. Somewhere in those years, my mother had been told her son died overseas, shown documents, given condolences, and then, while she was grieving, they had taken everything: the money, the house, her independence, and finally, her dignity. I stayed there until the sun began to rise, watching joggers pass, watching surfers carry boards toward the water. Normal life continuing as if nothing was wrong. Inside that mansion, a crime had been unfolding in plain sight for years. This was not greed. This was orchestration. Lucas had not snapped. He had planned. Every signature, every diagnosis, every transfer. Step by step, he had erased me and replaced himself. And my mother had been trapped inside the lie. I shut the laptop and sat in silence for a long time. There was a moment, brief but real, where I considered walking back to the house and confronting him directly, dragging him into the light, ending it fast. But rage solves nothing permanently. I needed proof. I needed witnesses that could not forget, records that could not be erased, evidence that would survive lawyers, money, and lies. This was no longer a family problem. It was a mission. And for the first time in 12 years, I knew exactly who my target was: my own brother. By the time the sun was fully up, I had already made my decision. I was not leaving again, not without knowing exactly what my mother had been living through. Paper records told me what had been stolen. They did not tell me how she had been broken. For that, I needed eyes inside the house. I made 3 calls from a prepaid phone. The first was to an old teammate who now ran a private security outfit. We did not exchange pleasantries. We never did. I told him I needed discreet surveillance equipment. Small, silent, reliable. He asked no questions, only gave me a time and a place. The second call was to a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse and guardianship fraud. We had crossed paths years ago overseas in circumstances that did not make the news. When I told her what I suspected, she went quiet. Then she told me to gather everything, every document, every recording, every second of proof. The third call was the hardest. I left a message for a contact who existed somewhere between government and shadow. I asked for financial tracing and background checks. I told him it was personal. He said that made it more dangerous, not less. That night, long after the house went dark, I returned. I approached from the waterside, climbing over the low wall near the beach path. The ocean masked my movements. Years of muscle memory guided each step. I did not rush. I did not hesitate. The back door lock was old, decorative, useless against practiced hands. It opened without a sound. Inside, the house smelled wrong. It did not smell like my mother. There was no trace of the lemon cleaner she loved, no hint of the simple meals she used to cook. The air was thick with expensive cologne, alcohol, and something sour underneath it all. Decay does not always rot wood. Sometimes it rots people. I moved room to room, placing devices carefully. A pinhole camera hidden behind a framed photograph. An audio sensor tucked inside a decorative plant. Another embedded in a smoke detector. Each one activated silently, feeding to a secure server I controlled. The living room was unrecognizable. My mother's furniture was gone, the worn armchair she loved. The bookshelf she dusted every Sunday, replaced with cold minimalist pieces that looked impressive and felt empty. The master bedroom made my chest ache. This had been my mother's space. The room where she was supposed to sleep with the ocean breeze coming through open windows. It no longer belonged to her. Designer clothes filled the closet, shoes lined up like trophies, jewelry laid out carelessly on the dresser. Not a single personal item of my mother's remained. I placed another camera and kept moving. Then I found the basement. I had designed it as a place for comfort, a guest suite, a small gym, a room for quiet evenings. It had proper ventilation, good lighting, and enough space for dignity. What I saw instead made my vision blur. A section of the basement had been crudely divided with thin drywall. A narrow hallway led to a door barely wider than a closet. Inside was a small room. No windows. A twin bed with a mattress too thin for an adult. A single lamp. A cheap plastic dresser. This was where my mother lived. The air was stale. The ceiling showed signs of water damage. A small utility sink sat outside the room. No bathroom, no privacy, no warmth. On the dresser were two items. A photograph of me in uniform, taken decades ago, young, proud, still believing the world made sense. Beside it was a purple heart, the one I had mailed home years ago, wrapped in a letter I never knew she would read again. She had kept them, even after being told I was dead, even after losing everything else. She kept proof that I existed. I placed a camera in the air vent above the room, my hands shaking despite my control. I wanted to tear the walls down. I wanted to wake her and carry her out of that place immediately. But I did not. If I revealed myself now, Lucas would destroy evidence. He would lie. He would hide behind lawyers and documents and paint me as unstable, and my mother would pay the price. I left the house before dawn, locking the door behind me as carefully as I had entered. By the time I reached my car, the surveillance feeds were already live on my tablet. Every room, every hallway, every sound. I sat there watching the screen as the house woke up. And when my mother appeared, emerging slowly from the basement door with her shoulders hunched and her eyes downcast. I realized something that hardened my resolve completely. This house was not just stolen, it was a prison, and my mother was its quietest inmate. I told myself I would watch calmly. I lied. The first morning unfolded like a routine perfected by cruelty. At 6:15, the basement door opened. My mother stepped out slowly, already dressed, already careful not to make noise. She moved like someone who had learned that visibility invited punishment. She went straight to the kitchen. I watched her rinse cups that were already clean, line them up, wipe the counter twice, 3 times. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from fear of doing something wrong. Lucas came down an hour later. He did not say good morning. He looked at the counter, frowned, and told her she used the wrong cloth. He said it casually, the way someone complains about the weather. She apologized immediately, too quickly, like an instinct drilled into her bones. By mid-morning, guests arrived. Friends, acquaintances, people who laughed loudly and never once asked who she was. I watched my mother serve them food she had been preparing since before sunrise. Not one thank you, not one glance. When a glass spilled, Lucas blamed her. When the ice bucket ran low, someone snapped their fingers at her like she was a dog. She hurried every time. Once, she nearly dropped a tray. A woman rolled her eyes and said something about incompetence. My mother nodded and apologized again. I gripped the edge of the tablet so hard my knuckles whitened. This was not occasional mistreatment. It was systematic. That afternoon, Lucas's wife came into the kitchen. She was irritated about something small. The coffee was not hot enough. Without hesitation, she poured it into the sink and threw the mug onto the floor. It shattered. She told my mother to clean it up. Slowly, because she did not want to hear noise. My mother knelt on the tile. I watched her pick up shards with bare fingers. I watched blood bead on her skin. I watched her wipe it away on her sleeve and keep going. No one helped her. That night, after the guests left, the tone shifted from public cruelty to private control. Lucas reviewed the house like an inspector. He criticized the floors, the dishes, the trash. He deducted money from her weekly food allowance for a tablecloth someone else had stained. $40. That was what he allowed her to eat on each week, while they drank wine worth hundreds of dollars a bottle. When she finally finished cleaning, she moved toward the stairs. Lucas stopped her and reminded her to lock the basement door when she went down. He said it was for safety. I watched him lock it from the outside after she disappeared below. The next night was worse. Lucas hosted a smaller gathering, just close friends. Someone asked where he found the help. He laughed. He said she came with the house, previous owner's relative or something. Slow, but cheap. Easier than hiring staff. Everyone laughed. I did not breathe. Later, when the guests were gone and the house was quiet, his wife went downstairs alone. She was drunk, loud, careless. She stood in the doorway of my mother's room and mocked her, accused her of pretending to forget things, said she should be grateful they let her stay at all, reminded her that a state nursing home was always an option if she caused trouble. My mother sat on the bed, hands folded, nodding, apologizing, thanking her. Then came the threat. If she ever talked about her dead son again, if she ever mentioned my name, she would be moved somewhere worse. I watched my mother agree, not because she believed it, but because she was afraid. When the basement door locked that night, I felt something inside me snap and reform into something colder. This was not neglect. This was not misunderstanding. This was not confusion. It was abuse, calculated, repeated, hidden behind paperwork and smiles. I shut off the sound and stared at the live feeds in silence. 12 years of war had taught me how men break under pressure. I had seen it happen in deserts and cities and jungles, but this was different. This was someone breaking slowly, quietly, in her own home. I understood then why people sometimes did terrible things. And I understood something else just as clearly. I could not rush this. I could not make a mistake, because if I failed, she would suffer more, and I would never forgive myself. So I watched, I recorded, I waited, and every second, the case against my own blood grew stronger. By the 5th day, I stopped counting hours. Sleep came in fragments. 10 minutes here, 20 there. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother on her knees wiping blood from the kitchen floor. So instead of sleeping, I followed the money. Money never lies. People do. My contact delivered the first data packet just after midnight. Encrypted files, clean, precise. The kind of work you only get from someone who knows how deep the dark really goes. I started with the life insurance payout. $10 million did not vanish. It moved. $2 million went into a legitimate investment account under Lucas's name. A hedge. Something he could point to if questions were ever asked. The rest fractured into pieces. Shell companies registered in different states. Short-term real estate purchases that were flipped on paper but never occupied. Luxury vehicles bought and sold within weeks to wash funds clean. $5 million was converted into physical assets. Gold bars stored in a private vault under an LLC Lucas controlled. The kind of move people make when they plan to disappear one day. $2 million funded the life I had watched on camera. Travel, clubs, art, jewelry, the appearance of success. The remaining money bled into accounts that fed off my mother's identity. Credit cards opened in her name, loans she never signed for. A reverse mortgage taken out on a small house she had inherited years earlier. The house was lost to foreclosure. The money never touched her hands. By the time I finished tracing it, her credit was destroyed. On paper, she looked reckless, in debt, unstable. Perfect cover. Then I opened the medical files. The fraudulent doctor's report was thin, careless. One visit, one conversation. Lucas answering questions meant for my mother. The diagnosis leaned heavily on words like appears and seems and family reports. But the real story was buried underneath. I found records from her actual physician. Years of routine visits, detailed notes, sharp memory, clear thinking. No signs of cognitive decline. The last appointment happened 6 years ago. The same year the house was transferred. After that, her access to proper medical care vanished. Lucas did not just steal money. He isolated her, cut off anyone who could challenge his version of reality. He turned my absence into a weapon and used grief as leverage. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling of the car. This was no longer just elder abuse. This was fraud layered on fraud. Identity theft, insurance fraud, financial exploitation, medical conspiracy. If exposed correctly, it would not end with a lawsuit. It would end with prison. But I wanted more than charges. I wanted the truth spoken out loud in a room full of witnesses. I wanted my mother to hear it. I wanted Lucas to have no room to rewrite the story. That was when I decided to stop hiding, not as myself, but as bait. Lucas believed he was untouchable. He believed the house was his. The money was gone. The past was buried. Men like him always make one mistake. They get greedy. I created a new identity by morning, a believable one. Real estate investor, clean credit. Digital footprint built from pieces my old life taught me how to manufacture. Then I made the call. Lucas answered on the third ring. I told him I was interested in his property, told him I was prepared to offer well above market value. Cash. Fast closing. No complications. There was a pause. Then excitement. The trap closed itself. As I ended the call, I glanced at the live feed. My mother was in the basement, folding laundry that did not belong to her. She did not know yet that the walls around her were about to fall, but they were, and when they did, the truth would come down with them. The next morning, the house moved differently. Lucas woke early. Too early. I watched him pace the living room, phone pressed to his ear, rehearsing confidence. He barked orders at my mother without looking at her. Polish the railings, clean the windows again, stay out of sight when the buyer arrives. She nodded and obeyed. At 11:30, he sent her downstairs. I watched her hesitate at the bottom of the steps, like someone stepping into cold water. Then the door closed. The lock slid into place. At noon, I rang the bell. I wore a tailored suit and carried a leather portfolio. My hair was styled differently, glasses on, posture relaxed in a way that suggested money without effort. The man Lucas opened the door for was not the son he thought he had buried. He smiled wide, invited me in, offered a drink. I declined and complimented the house. He led me through the rooms like a proud curator. He lied smoothly about renovations, about history, about ownership. He spoke of the place as if it had grown from his ambition rather than my sacrifice. I listened, took notes, asked small questions. Then I asked about the basement. His smile tightened. He said it was storage, old furniture, nothing important. I told him I needed to see it. We stood at the top of the stairs for a moment that stretched too long. Then he nodded and led the way. The basement lights flicked on. He talked quickly. Utilities, plumbing, square footage, anything to keep my attention away from the narrow hallway. I walked toward the door. It was locked. "What is this room?" I asked. "Storage," he said again, his voice sharper now. I reached into my pocket and produced a lockpick. Not rushed, not dramatic, just efficient. The door opened. My mother looked up from the bed. Fear crossed her face. Then confusion. Then something softer, something trying to remember. Lucas spoke fast. "That is the housekeeper. She prefers it down here." I ignored him. I stepped inside the room. "Mom," I asked gently, "what is your name?" She glanced at Lucas. He shook his head. "Eleanor," she whispered. "Eleanor Hale." I turned slowly. "Same last name as you," I said. "Coincidence?" Lucas swallowed. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photograph, one she had taken decades ago, me in uniform, young, unbroken. "Do you know this man?" Her hands trembled. "My son," she said. "Michael. But they told me he died." I removed the glasses, changed my posture, let my voice drop to the one she used to know. "I am right here, Mum." She stood on unsteady legs, reached for my face like she was afraid it would disappear. "Michael." I caught her before she fell. Behind us, Lucas backed toward the stairs. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "I can explain." "You declared me dead," I said calmly. "You took my money. You took this house. You locked our mother in a basement." Sirens sounded outside. He turned pale. I stepped aside and let him see the tablet in my hand. The footage, the audio, days of truth compressed into minutes. His lies collapsed in real time. By the time the police reached the basement, Lucas was sitting on the steps, shaking. My mother held onto my arm as if letting go might erase me again. "I am here," I told her, "and this time I am not leaving." The police reached the basement first. 2 officers came down the stairs cautiously, hands resting near their belts, eyes scanning the cramped space. Behind them were voices, radios crackling, the controlled chaos of authority finally entering a place that had thrived on silence. My mother tightened her grip on my arm. "I am here," I whispered. "You are safe now." Lucas tried to stand when the officers approached him. His confidence was gone. What remained was panic, raw and unfiltered. "There has been a mistake," he said. "I am her legal guardian. I have documents." A woman in a dark suit stepped forward behind the officers. Calm, focused. She introduced herself as a representative from Adult Protective Services. She asked my mother a single question. "Ma'am, do you feel safe living here?" My mother looked at the basement walls, at the narrow bed, at the door that locked from the outside. She shook her head. No, that was all it took. Lucas was placed in handcuffs. He protested loudly as they read him his rights. He shouted my name, begged, tried to remind me we were brothers. I said nothing. Upstairs, the house erupted. Lucas's wife came running down the stairs, screaming that this was harassment, that they had money, that lawyers would destroy everyone involved. Her voice cracked when she saw the officers escorting Lucas out of the house. She turned on my mother. "This is your fault!" she screamed. "You ungrateful old woman!" An officer stepped between them instantly. "You are under arrest as well, ma'am!" The shouting turned to sobbing. Accusations collapsed into noise. Meanwhile, my mother was guided upstairs and into an ambulance. Paramedics wrapped her in a blanket, took her vitals, spoke to her gently, treated her like a human being again. I rode with her to the hospital. Under fluorescent lights, doctors ran tests, blood work, scans, evaluations. Hours passed. The results were clear. No dementia, no cognitive decline, no confusion beyond trauma and exhaustion. She had been lucid the entire time. They told her her son was dead. They isolated her. They controlled her access to money and medicine. They broke her slowly and called it care. When I heard the confirmation out loud, something in my chest finally released. Anger gave way to grief. Grief gave way to resolve. Over the next days, everything unraveled. The forged signatures, the false guardianship, the insurance fraud, the stolen funds, the abuse. It all surfaced. Lucas and his wife were formally charged. Multiple counts, elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, conspiracy. Assets were frozen, accounts seized. The house placed under court control. The doctor who signed the false diagnosis was investigated. His license suspended pending charges. My mother watched it all from a hospital bed, holding my hand. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I should have fought harder." "You survived," I said. That was enough. For the first time in years, she slept without locking a door. And for the first time since I came home, I knew the worst was finally behind us. The house by the water was sold within 3 weeks. I never went back after the night the police took Lucas away. I did not need to. That place was no longer a home. It was a crime scene filled with echoes my mother deserved to forget. While the courts untangled the mess and prosecutors built their case, I focused on one thing only: getting my mother back to herself. She stayed in the hospital for 10 days, not because she was sick in the way they claimed, but because years of stress had hollowed her out. Malnutrition, dehydration, old injuries that were never treated properly. The doctors were gentle and honest. They told us her body would heal faster than her trust. They were right. At first, she woke up panicked, afraid she was late for work. Afraid someone would yell if she rested too long, afraid I would disappear if she blinked. I stayed, every night, every morning. I sat in the chair beside her bed and told her stories I never could before, about places I had been, about things I had survived, about how every month I sent money because I believed she was safe. She cried when she understood that, not from sadness, from relief. A week after she was discharged, I received a file from an old account I had forgotten existed. Years ago, before everything went underground, I had placed a small investment into a digital asset on a whim and walked away. $50,000. An experiment. Time had done what I never expected. The number on the screen did not feel real. Tens of millions, quietly waiting, untouched. When I showed my mother, she laughed. A real laugh. The kind that starts soft and surprises you by continuing. "I do not need all that," she said. "You do not need to worry ever again," I replied. We bought a new home together. Smaller, calmer, not a mansion. A place with sunlight and neighbors who waved. A place where doors stayed unlocked because fear was no longer part of the air. She planted flowers the first week, dirt under her nails, smile on her face. The trial took longer. It always does. But the evidence was overwhelming. Documents, video, audio, witnesses. There was nowhere for lies to hide. Lucas never looked at me in court. His wife did. Once. Only once. There was no anger left in her eyes, only the realization that money does not protect you forever. They were sentenced months later, long enough that they would grow old inside concrete walls. Long enough that they would never control another life again. As for my mother, she began to live again. She cooked because she wanted to. She rested because she could. She slept through the night. She stopped apologizing for existing. One evening we sat on the porch as the sun dipped low and the sky turned warm and gold. She reached for my hand. "You came back," she said. "I never stopped coming back, Mum. I just took the long way. For 12 years I fought enemies I could see. I learned too late that the most dangerous ones wear familiar faces. But I also learned something else. Survival is not just about staying alive. It is about returning for the people who cannot fight anymore. I did not come home to reclaim a house. I came home to reclaim my mother, and this time we were finally safe."